Is that like a place?
It was the camp, yes, where this was known. Very much like a concentration camp. They would take Koreans and they would torture them. They would push the human body to see how far it could go. But what makes it even more horrific today is that to a certain extent the Japanese government refuses to admit this happened. That these comfort women were volunteers.
이 강의는 캐나다의 한 고등학교에서 있었던 강의입니다. 해외에서는 수많은 나라들이 한국에 대해 배울 때 잘못된 역사를 가르치고 배우고 있습니다. 최근에서야 깨어있는 지식인들이 이를 바로잡기 위해 노력하고 있지만 아직도 한국의 역사를 제대로 알지 못한 채 특히 일본의 왜곡된 역사를 가르치는 곳이 많습니다.
So we're going to move on to our next point, Korea under Japanese rule, 1910 to 1945. 1910, that's when Japan was annexed. And there's some controversy even over that, because the basic fact of this annexation is still under dispute. The Koreans assert that Emperor Gojong used a fake seal, therefore his order to surrender was invalid. So he was given a piece of paper, he was supposed to use a seal, like a stamp, as a signature, saying that yes, we give up control of Korea to Japan. But Koreans to this day assert that it was not the right seal, therefore it was invalid, and it was completely illegal for Japanese to come and annex Korea. The day that the treaty was put into effect, August 29th, is still known as the Day of Shame in Korea. Now, life under the Japanese during the occupation was very harsh. Very harsh. This is one of the darkest times in the history of Korea. The Japanese people sought to eliminate Korean culture, and they attempted to perpetuate cultural genocide. And I don't use that term lightly, I mean it literally, cultural genocide.
일본에서는 지금도 교과서의 강제 연행이나 종군 위안부에 대한 역사를 지우고 있으며 세계적인 명문대라 불리는 하버드마저도 식민지라는 표현 대신 통합이라 말하며 일본이 주장하는 엉터리 역사를 그대로 기재한 것이 밝혀져 전 세계인들은 다시 한번 큰 충격을 받았던 일도 있었습니다. 그런데 캐나다의 학교에서 역사 시간도 아닌 문학 시간에 한국의 시조를 배우기 전 한국의 역사에 대해 바르게 알아야 한다며 이 강의를 했던 것인데요.
There was an extremely strict set of rules that was put into place. Like for instance, if you don't pay your taxes, you get the death penalty. Think about that. You don't pay your taxes, you get the death penalty. Extremely harsh. In 1919, there was an uprising. This is when Emperor Gojong died. He was rumored to have been poisoned. In 1919, on March 1st, there were peaceful rallies that took place throughout Korea. So Koreans peacefully demonstrated against Japanese rule. On this day, 7,000 Korean people were died. There's one particular town, Jamri in particular, where the Japanese soldiers and the Japanese government took Korean Christians, they crucified some of them, they herded others into a church and set it on fire and burned these people alive. This was an extremely harsh and brutal reaction to what was a peaceful demonstration. After this point, and the cultural genocide keeps on getting more intense, after this point, all Korean citizens were required to follow Shintoism and worship at Shinto shrines. Now, I don't know how much you folks know about Shintoism, but this is the veneration of Japanese ancestors, of famous Japanese people who had died, and your grandfather, and your great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents. So Korean people were forced to worship these Japanese dead spirits, which was a huge affront to their own religious beliefs. At school, the Korean language was oppressed. You could no longer speak Korean. You no longer learned about Korean history.
캐나다 교사는 강의를 하며 이렇게 말했습니다.
이 강의는 한국에 대해 거의 아무것도 모르는 학생들을 위한 아주 짧은 강의입니다. 내 지식이 완전하지 않다는 것을 알고 있지만 한국의 역사는 너무 길고 상세하기 때문에 한국의 역사를 진정으로 다루려면 많은 시간이 걸릴 것입니다.
라며 자신의 강의에 잘못되거나 정확하지 않은 것들이 있을 수 있다. 그런 부분은 기꺼이 수정하겠다 말했습니다.
The language itself was eventually banned, with everybody being forced to speak in Japanese. And finally, towards the end of this period, even Korean names were not allowed to be used. You must name your child a Japanese name. Now, if you think about it, for a culture that has had hundreds of years of tradition during the Joseon dynasty, to not be allowed to name your child what you want to because another group of people is telling you that you can't, you must name it after their people, their culture, their language, it was considered to be hugely offensive. But the Koreans would, of course, name their child a Japanese name and enter it on the rolls and all that, but they would still give them their own Korean names, secret names, that they would actually use in the family.
그리고 일본인들이 가장 꺼려하는 부분에 대해 말하기 시작했는데요.
And finally, towards the end of World War II, we have two very dark parts in Korean history. The first one is regarding the comfort women during World War II, and then Unit 731. Unit 731 is another board, but I wanted to talk about that anyway. So towards the middle end of World War II, the Japanese people started to take Korean women hostage. They would kidnap them, essentially, from their homes, and they would force them to be sex slaves. They would ship them off to the front, to various places around the Asian theater. They would set up brothels, and Japanese soldiers would rape these women repeatedly. It was, we can't even imagine this. It's horrific. But what makes even more horrific today is that, to a certain extent, the Japanese government refuses to admit this happened. The Japanese government say that these people, these comfort women, which is a euphemism if you've ever heard one, that these comfort women were volunteers. But if you talk to the comfort women from Korea and from the other countries around the Asian theater that were conquered by Japan, it's obvious that this was not voluntary. If you hear the stories that came out of Korea, you would know that this is not voluntary at all.
교사는 분명한 어조로 이렇게 말합니다. 한국인들이 자원한 게 아니었다는 건 너무나 분명한 사실이라고 말이죠. 문학교사인 그가 학생들에게 다른 사실을 가르치기 위해 얼마나 공부했는지 알 수 있었습니다. 그리고 그가 꺼낸 다음 말도 놀라웠습니다.
Estimates range from 10,000 to 200,000 comfort women who were raped during World War II. Even if it's only 10,000, it's still mass rape on a scale that did not take place anywhere else in the 20th century. The second aspect, horrific aspect about the occupation during World War II in particular was what was called Unit 731. Now, I don't know how much you folks know about the Nazis and their experimentation with Jewish prisoners, but the Japanese did very much the same thing in Unit 731. They would take Koreans and Chinese people and Thai and other nationalities around the Asian theater, and they would torture them. They would push the human body to see how far it could go. You could look all this up online if you...
그 증거들은 오늘날에도 온라인으로 확인할 수 있을 정도로 넘쳐난다 말합니다. 캐나다 교사는 놀라울 정도로 한국의 역사를 정확히 알고 있었으며 오히려 우리 한국인들이 잊고 있던 부분까지 상세히 말했습니다. 어떤 역사학자들을 봐도 이 정도로 말할 수 있었던 사람은 드물었기에 이 강의는 정말로 놀라웠는데요. 여러분의 생각은 어떤가요? 앞으로도 이와 같은 강의들이 널리 퍼져 더 이상 한국의 역사를 왜곡하는 일이 없어져야 할 것입니다. 오늘 준비한 영상은 여기까지입니다. 시청해 주셔서 정말 감사합니다.